This podcast is brought to you by Humans, the next generation HRIS supporting distributed organizations globally.
Joobee, first of all, thanks very much for taking the time to joining me today. It generally means a lot to me, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I am good. I am very good. Sun is out.
Fantastic. You've got one of the best weeks in London of definitely the last few months.
April is a very confusing month.
Absolutely. So before we jump straight into it, I would love for you to share a little bit about your story for people that are not familiar with you. You've got a fascinating background from engineering into the wonderful world of people. How that happened? Tell me everything.
How that happened? That's a question I ask myself every day. So I have to admit that, where I landed in HR, it's not that it was by accident. I remember early in my career when I was having my career conversation with my managing director, and he says, Joobee, what would you like to do for your career? And I said, I really, really enjoy problem solving. That motivates me. And he was like, that's all good, but actually you need to know what problems you would like to solve for the rest of your career. And that is where I realized and, reflected back and realized that what I love is to help people learn and grow to achieve what they want. It's as simple as that. So if you look at when I was a lecturer, I was helping students to learn and grow. When I was a consultant, HR, L&D leader, I was helping leaders to learn and grow. When I was a HR leader in startup, I was trying to help the organization and the people to learn and grow so that they can transition from one stage to the other. And now after I went independent, I'm still trying to do that, but in a bigger scale to help founders, startup leaders, and HR leaders to learn and grow. So it was by accident the context narrowed down into startup and HR, but the problem I choose to solve in my career is always about helping others learn and grow so that they can achieve what they want.
Beautiful. And we're going to spend this time together talking about growth today. You're definitely familiar with growth, different stages. Different stages. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have seen the 10 million revenue journey, the 100 million revenue journey, up to kind of close to $1 billion.
That was when I was
journey.
in corporate.
Yes. And which is obviously absolutely insane. We can start perhaps talking about this unlinear journey of scaling a company from the very early days, let's say kind of the 0 to 100 million in revenue. What's your view there? What have you experienced? What are the different stages of the journey?
So it's really interesting. So you mentioned that I started as an engineer, systems engineer to be specific, which means I love to figure out the system, the pattern, the trend. And I think it's not that I figured it out. Actually, there's a lot of, resources and other people who has experienced this also observe that in that journey is usually about 10 years, ideally, to get to the 0 to 100 million revenue. There are 3 distinct stages, and Notion Capital coined it as start, build, scale. It's named differently by different people, but it's 3 stages. So the first stage is start stage, which is when founders are focusing on finding a meaningful problem to solve. That is, of course, with broad opportunities in order to build sellable products that they can narrow down, they can sell to a narrow customer, but eventually generalize to a bigger market. So at this stage where you're figuring this out, it's very normal that it is much more ad hoc, much more flexible, and you're trying to grow revenue from 0 to 3, and your headcount is usually below 50 people. That's the first stage. That's the characteristic of the start stage. Then when you have product market fit, that's when you go to the build stage. And this stage is profoundly different. You talk about non-linear. It is non-linear. It's profoundly different to the start stage, where you need to get your product to your customer effectively. And what that means is you need to start to be more structured and systematized in order to grow your revenue from approximately 3 to 30 million. And your head count typically is below 400, depending on the type of business. And once you have that, you move on to the third stage, which is the scale stage, where you, again, is profoundly different to the previous stage, because at this stage, you're focusing on getting the product to either multiple market, different geo, or you're even launching new product. And this is where you want to scale your revenue from about 30 to 100 million, and it will be over 400 headcount. This stage typically is so much more complex. You need to be able to stay consistent in order to dominate your market that you're already in, but also being able to start to predict yield for the markets or products that you're going to start to launch. So the three stages are it's actually very, very different. And at each stage, when the transition between each stage is where what we would call the inflection point, and this is where startup tend to slow down, struggle, lose productivity and momentum.
Why is that?
Because what works previously doesn't work for the next stage anymore. And if you're not aware of that, what we'll do is we'll do more of what we've always done. And we wonder why it doesn't yield the results that we want, because we need actually to change. What I look at it from organizational and people perspective, so which means your organization and people need to change in terms of 6 things. Your people and org strategy, your structure, your capabilities, your process and systems, how you work with org data, and the way you work. All these 6 things will need to change at each of the stages.
We touched on the size of the org in terms of headcount as you scale. People are an important component of any organization. It doesn't matter how quickly you want to scale or you need to scale. What's the role of the people, HR, and talent function, and how do you see the role of these functions evolving across the different stages, and obviously the priorities and challenges?
Yeah. So if we will look, number one, the HR function is part of the org, which means they also need to go through that 3-step changes. At the first stage, they need to stay adaptable and flexible. At the second stage, they need to start to be more structured and systematized. And the third one is to be able to manage highly complex environment. Same as the organization. They need to do that themselves, but at the same time, their role, their function in an organization is to help the other functions to do that. So they have to do 2 things. And it might seem a little bit, what I'm going to say might be a bit obvious, but I'll say it anyway. Besides the founder, CEO, and if you have COO, HR function is the only other either function or people that has a view across the whole organization and know what's going on. So that is why it's not just their role, but they are your change agents when you are transitioning between each of the stages. But if your HR function is too many times busy firefighting or don't have time to build out the relationship that they need with their business and be their partner, that transition will be a little bit harder.
How do you see the role specifically of the people leader? Like if you look at VP people, chief people officer, evolving also in terms of priorities, what they should be thinking about in order to support an organization that is on a pretty aggressive growth trajectory.
So if let's narrow down to, let's say, transition from start to build, where you have to now operate at scale, you need to bring your product to your customers, the way your organization need to be structured start changing. The way, the capabilities of the people you need to start to hire is different. If I were to put it really simply, besides doing the technical stuff, which is all the structure, process, etc., is that change management piece. is to bring people along that journey along with the senior leadership team. So if you think about, the storytelling, the painting the picture of where we're going, and as part of every change, whether it's process, whether it's system, it's ways of working, different type of people we're hiring, that needs to be communicated very, very clearly. So the change in the 3 stages in terms of roles, as I mentioned, is really clear. Your people and org strategy aligning to the business needs to be adaptable, systematized, able to manage complexity, but the consistent skill or capability that the role need to be able to do is to manage change management, communicate really, really well to bring people along that step change.
When you mentioned specifically the different stages, also in terms of evolution, headcount, evolution of revenue growth, things that need to evolve. When we look at the VC model specifically, we are familiar with the fact that on average, let's say a VC-backed company, maybe 1 in 10 is going to make it. Maybe you get this 80 to 90 to 80% failure rate. So what's your view there? Why there are so many startups that are not making it?
So can't answer for every factor. Going to look at it from the people perspective. So that is your stage between start to build, right? Where start, that is where 40% of startups don't find their product market fit, and that's where they fall off. And then the second stage is the build stage, which is where another 40% fall off because they can't get their product effectively to their customers. For me, this is my sweet spot. So why here? Again, the transition from working, in a what I call creative chaos space to a systematic and structured way in order to get repeatable results is very, very different. And from people and org perspective, if we are not, let's look at HR leader. Many times because founders, they are founders because they are able to pivot quickly, they're able to think quickly, they're able to experiment and test quickly. The second stage is actually very uncomfortable for them, and they will try to still hold on to the way of working. And many times when I work with founders, they are the first one that I would help to make that mindset shift, that need to be more structured, the need to be more process driven. Not to stifle the organization, but to bring consistency and repeatability of results. And that is where, if it's a knock-on effect, right? If the founder don't see it, we're not going to implement that. The SLT don't see it, we're not going to implement that. The leaders don't see it, we're not going to be able to build a growth engine. And when you can't do that, you start to, spend a lot of time, resources, effort, money, and you're not getting the results that you want. And that's where I think from people and org perspective, you're not able to build that growth machine because you can't transition the ways of working.
We're talking obviously a lot about the people, the component, the role, and the impact that people can have as you scale an organization. But everything ultimately starts with the recruitment side of the journey. And what we've seen in the market, specifically in the last few years, was a massive change in approach to hiring, also related to the market climate. If we look back at the second half of 2020 and 2021, companies were scaling at a pretty substantial pace because capital was abundant, raising funding was much more easier, and then you get 2022, 2023, when things were very different. What's your view in terms of timing when you are looking at hiring, where you can't predict, obviously, the market dynamics, you can't necessarily anticipate, but there is something that you can do in terms of preparing. What's your view there?
So if I understand correctly, is it sensible to hire very quickly, like we did in the 2 years ago when, like you say, capital is in abundance, is a fundamental problem or challenge of mindset, I think. Whether it is, you have lots of money and you can hire really quickly, or you don't have lots of money and you need to hire slower, the fundamental mindset that I say why it's a challenge is if we believe to solve a problem is by throwing lots of people to that problem, then it's just how fast we make that mistake. You have lots of funding, you make that mistake faster because you hire faster. You have less funding. If you still have that mindset, you still think that people, hiring people is the only way to solve problems in the organization, let's say, or do the work that needs to be done. What I find fascinating is in the last 6 months, I've never been asked so much, whether it's in my newsletter questions or talking to people about workforce planning. Because we don't practice that very much in startup. When we say, we need to hire, you go, here's the spreadsheet, write the roles that you want. But we didn't take time to think about it. So what people are starting to do more now, I think, a startup, because the funding is, not as flowing freely as previously, is they go, if we have limited resources, how do we make the most out of it? And that's sensible business practice anyway. So the first thing is we need to know what work needs to be done. We need to do what you call workforce planning. Mm-hmm. So if you were to go 1 or 2 years' time, this is where we want to get to as a strategy, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, therefore translating to this goal, therefore translating to this work that needs to be done. We are now not jumping straight to the part where we go, let's hire as many people as possible. We need to do the next step, which is to go consider all other factors of where the work can be done, if not by people. Can it be automated? Can it be done by somebody else? For example, you can have a lot of queries from customers. Do you hire more and more customer success team? Or can you find a way where they can help themselves? So you reduce the work to be done, therefore you reduce the hire that you have. If you go customer onboarding, we're going to automate that. So instead of hiring more people to onboard customer, you hire more senior technical customer people to automate the process. That's when you come to the third step where you go, right, who are we going to hire? What's the right capability? Rather than skipping the step and just hire more people to solve the problem.
Something challenging that I've seen often is, do I build for today, mm-hmm. or do I try and build, and obviously that has an impact on workforce planning, headcount planning, mm-hmm. where I'm going to be in 12 months. Mm-hmm. The big challenge there is that I can hire more people because I expect to be in a specific position in 12, 18 months time. Mm-hmm. But then the reality, maybe from, again, customer acquisition perspective, mm-hmm. revenue growth perspective, or product perspective, is not going to materialize. Mm-hmm. And then you get a big problem because you overhired. And mm-hmm. then you can't absorb more engineers, or you can't absorb more account executive, and they mm-hmm. can be very, very challenging. Is there anything specific that you have observed there? Like, again, you've seen a number of companies mm-hmm. scaling at incredible pace. Anything that, is still with you? Maybe some mistakes as well that you observed?
So it depends, I think, from your question. There's 2 ways to look at it. If we look at the volume of work, like you say, if you don't get the customer, you don't, get the sales. If we're looking at the volume of works equals to more people, then can we look at it second way? Is there other ways that it can be more flexible or adaptable? For example, can the work, as I mentioned just now, can be automated? Or what we forget is there are different ways to build an organization with people. It's not just full-time employee. So in my past, we do leverage, a more flexible model. What are the core work that will never, either outsource or, it must be someone who's doing it permanently in-house? And then you start to look at other flexible model, which is, could it be a 1-year contract? Could it be a freelancer? Could it be an agency? So that you can flex. So you don't have to commit immediately mm-hmm. to a full-time employee. So that's what we have always been very mindful of, to avoid having to let go of people.
And it's ultimately your way of mitigating risks as well there as much as possible.
Yeah, what I'm going to say is really simple. You need to think about it. Spend time, to translate that strategy into the different scenarios, rather than immediately jumping to action. So if you are more aware upfront of these are the 3 possible scenarios, think about the scenario and go, we consciously make this decision. And I'll give you a very tangible example, right? We did that in one of my company where we are growing really fast. We still believe that we should have a more flexible model for our recruitment team. That's what we would like to go ahead with. But after discussion as a collective in a business, they chose to go, we are confident in our growth, therefore we're going to hire permanent employees. And that didn't work out. And we have to let go more than half of that team at the end of the year. So you can, at least if you think about it up front, you're not walking blindly to make that decision. And when that happens, at least you won't go, I could have done that.
Would you mind me asking how that felt when you actually, as a people leader, need to make the hard decision there? It's okay, we need to part ways with a meaningful chunk of people.
It is something that I think a lot of, not just HR leaders, any leaders making that decision is difficult, because you feel like you're going to impact somebody's life. If you're the leader of the business, you have to zoom out and go, if this is really pragmatic way of looking at it to start with. If you don't let go of X% now, will the 100% still be here in a year's time? So it's a hard decision, never an easy one. When you make that, you have to make the decision. Many times when we don't, it's just delaying that decision. When you make the decision, the ultimate bottom line is you can do that in a human way. You can be compassionate when you're making that decision. You can be compassionate in supporting them on the way out. Everything else, that decision, if it needs to be made, is probably better to be made earlier, because dragging it out has never, in my experience, worked out.
We're going full 360 here. So we touch on the strategy, we touch on the acquisition piece. One other aspects that for me is very important is the accountability piece. So we identify the people that we believe can be part of this growth journey. They care about being part of this journey. They want to build with us. How do we make sure that they are successful? How do we make sure that, and again, for me, part of the success is a sense of responsibility, accountability. How do you, drive your own success? What's your view there?
I would start with probably distinguishing 2 different things that you mentioned just now: responsibility and accountability. So for me, accountability is ownership over results. Responsibility is ownership over task.
Okay.
In startup, where you don't have time to think, you're running as fast as you can, what happens is, these 2 are not clearly defined. Why it is important, I think, to differentiate that is So I'll use an example. Take OKRs. It's one of, my favorite framework. A lot of startup use that for, goal setting and accountability, broadly accountability. Why I love OKRs is because the framework itself at first principle focuses on ownership of results, hence key results. But when we use it as a checklist for task. And instead, if we want to drive change and people are motivated by the results needle that they move, they should be accountable for results. Take an example. If an OKR says I have to roll out initiative, implement ATS, improve, hiring process, those are a checklist of tasks. I can complete it, but I might not see results, or I don't know what results I'm trying to drive besides completing tasks. But if we say, I am accountable for let's say, increasing quality of hire that's coming in. I'm accountable for reducing the cost for hire. Every task I do, I can see the needle being moved. So I'm not worried when, many times we want to hire people, we want to empower them to, to have accountability. The part that I'm worried about is people running around very busy doing a lot of tasks that doesn't drive results. It neither benefit the business in terms of moving the needle. It neither benefit the individual because they don't see the change that they're making.
Could be sometimes they don't even realize they actually are doing the wrong thing from the perspective. Or?
Yeah, because if we're not, and back to where I say why it's so important to differentiate between the two is because we then don't implement the right process, the structure, the ways of working, the focus on the right thing. So then we focus on, for example, as I mentioned, lots of tasks, not moving the needle, instead of the results that we really want to hone in to drive that change.
Is there anything specific that you have done, any strategies you implemented to create the more accountability focus type culture?
OKR is a good one to start with. If we look at organizational level, what needle are we trying to move at the business level, functional level? And in terms of how do I do it is really repetitive and boring. So for example, in SLT, if we are to, decide on the next year's, OKRs is really important. I will literally keep asking the question, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to move the needle? We want to roll this out, 10 campaigns. Why? What is it that we're trying to move? Is it really persistently asking the question so we hone into the results rather than focusing on writing checklists. I do that for my team. I do that for individuals in my team. So I get very repetitive.
OKRs, I think, is a bit of a controversial topic. I mean, I've been part of organizations, even on substantial scale, that just hate them.
Tell me why do you hate them?
I think there is this element of I want to retain a little bit more flexibility. And sometimes when you have something that you measure against in a way that feels a little bit too rigid, it feels like, I can't explore. If I see an opportunity to do something better, something different, and I want to just hone into it.
I'm hearing what you're talking about, so, the task that you want to do.
Yeah.
But OKR is not about measuring tasks. And that's what I mean by the implementation is wrong. So I work with a lot of founders and they go, I don't want to limit myself. I'm like, you shouldn't. You should be able to go, this doesn't work, I'm going to try this. But that is the initiative. Yeah. It's not the key results. Where you want to increase revenue, it will always be the same.
It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you do it.
If you want to increase, customer satisfaction, that's not going to change. How you do it. And that's the part that's...
Do you think that it changes also based on the stage you are at? Like, I don't know, OKR can be effective at a certain size or less effective at a certain other size, or it's just the way you define and evolve them?
Is how you use it. OKRs is really simple, right? At its core is what's the destination I want to get to? How do I know I've got there? And then when you're a smaller team, you don't have to have so many structure on the initiative, the 3 projects we're going to do. But when you're 1,000 people, the OKR still remain the same. The translation from the initiative, we are going to, let's say, the initiative is we're going to go into the German market. Then you start to break down all the details. That gets more complicated. But when you're 30 people, you just go, we're going to put somebody there. Versus we are going to build, 50 people team to grab how many % of the market size. So it's the same, but more or less complex.
We identify the team, we identify the strategy, we identify the team. We have the team executing, honing their impact, having a good level of accountability. How do you make sure we retain them? What's your view there? How do you approach that?
Oh, that's a favorite question that people tend to ask HR leaders. Right. What I'm going to say is you actually have a lot of really, really good resources out there on how to retain your employees. So instead today, I'll try to look at it from a different perspective. Since we're talking about start, build, scale, the journey, evolution journey of a startup. what I'll say is when you transition from one stage to the other, it is very normal and you can expect this. You will have higher attrition than normal. So during your inflection point, it's very, very normal to have higher attrition, and don't panic. And here's the two reasons why that happens. Number one, as a business, from the business perspective, I mentioned that, the way the business operates changes, and therefore the capabilities needed also changes. So your employees at one, that is right for the previous stage, if they didn't develop, they're not able to develop the capabilities needed in the current stage, or you as a business didn't develop them to grow their capabilities that you need in the current stage, most likely you'll be talking about parting ways. So that's from business perspective. From the employee's perspective, there are many employees that know where they thrive and what stage of the business that they love. So for example, those who love the creative chaos, really, getting stuck into everything, they don't want to be in an environment where you need to systematize. Those who love, the part where you build the structure and system, don't love to maintain it when it's at a more complex stage, and they may leave. And that, for me, is the same. I love the second stage, and I remember having a conversation with one of my founders. I said, when we get to 400, we're hiring my backfill. Why? And that's before I even joined the company. I'm like, because you will get the best out of me, and I do not love the next stage. I can learn to do how to do the next stage, but I don't want to. So it's that, that passion or awareness of employees who might go, this stage is not right for me. I'm going to go back to the last stage and start all over again. So they choose to leave, they self-select out. So from the business and from the employee's perspective, it's a decision point in a way during that inflection point, whether, do I want to continue the journey or do I not? So it's quite natural to see that it's a higher attrition rate during that time. That's why it's important not to prolong inflection point if you could, because then you will see, not just as I mentioned, loss of productivity, momentum, you will also have unhappy people if they're unclear where the business is heading towards. That is the one that you want to avoid.
What's your view on the impact on the culture there? Because the way you're describing is extremely rational. Like, it makes absolute sense. But there is a component that I personally experience, and it's always a bit of a struggle, like, in transparency, where someone might not be relevant for the next phase of the journey, and they make total sense. And we can have the conversation and we can be aligned on that. But ultimately, people also build relationship in the company. So even if from a rational perspective, someone say, hey, I want to go because I don't want to, be as part of the next phase, but they still build rapport, they build relationship. And when people as part of a company feel like this vibe of, I have my kind of friends at work because we spend a good chunk of time together, and I want to be working with these people that, I care about, and we can accomplish great things together. How do you go about that component, which, again, I find always a little bit hard when we have a conversation with people because someone is transitioning out. What's your view there?
I always believe in, you want to give everyone a choice. What I mean by that, too many times what happens in startup is we don't know that's coming. When it comes, it's almost like, in a romantic relationship where, you reach a point of no return and you have to make a decision because you were not mindful of what's coming. You go into a relationship, you're going to disagree. If you talk earlier on how you disagree, when I'm angry, this is what I need, versus when I'm angry, then we're already shouting at each other.
Yeah.
So
That will be too late.
That will be too late, right? So if we hit the inflection point and suddenly people go, oh my God, all the change is coming and now you are not, you're not performing, etc. That is the worst point in time to have any choice. Because, for example, as I mentioned, right, if I didn't realize that's coming, I didn't grow my skill, and that skill is, no longer applicable in the next stage, then I'm being managed out. I don't have the choice. But if you really, right from the beginning, that's why I say storytelling and, managing expectation. is, let's say we're going on this 10 years journey. Right from the beginning, this is what's going to happen. These are the change that are needed. These are the general capabilities that are needed. And I will go, before you hit that inflection point, I'll go, you know what, I really love this company and I would love to continue working with the people that I love. I'll be aware of what's needed. I'll start to grow my skills so I can continue on the journey. That's the choice that I would like to have as an employee, and most people. Versus you hit that point, the skill is needed now, you cannot grow that skill in 2 weeks' time, and then it's just...
I love that. And I think that's a lot about communication, managing expectations, be extremely transparent with people. And sometimes as a leader, when you are so focused on execution, you miss a little bit the mark there and say, okay, am I communicating the right things at the right time, at the right frequency? And often you're not. That's just the reality of it. So you need to, again, be way more mindful.
I would like to share a little example,
Yes.
which I was really impressed with last year. So last year I did time with a VC, and so it's Notion Capital. The moment they invest in a startup, they will start to, help them paint the picture of the journey. Not just, of course, they're really good at the journey of go-to-market, that's where they specialize, but also the evolution of the organization and people. And that's a safe space, right? Like I said, before it hits inflection point. And people go, oh, I see that. And they start to either plan or be aware. And I remember meeting some of the SLT from some of the podco, and they go, I don't know if I will be there in the build stage. I'm like, wow. They go, I do love these, but at least I know what I need to prepare for. And that is the position that I think everyone should be in, rather than when you are hitting the inflection point, all the emotion is happening. So people, like I said, have the choice. And I love that, when VC are able to, because they see this over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're a founder, first time SLT, it's like you've never seen it. But if you know that's coming, you have a choice on how you're going to act.
You touched on something interesting there, like you might have a founder that is not familiar with these aspects of the journey. Lots of founders can be first-time founders, so even if you've done this 2 times, it's not the same thing as maybe an investor that's seen pattern across hundreds of companies. And in general, like working with founders is not extremely easy, I'd say, for a number of people.
Yep.
You work with a few at this point.
Yeah.
Any advice you have? Like, what's your view specifically in terms of how people, leaders, can best interact and work with founders as scaling companies? And some of the challenges I see in general is there's a massive level of ambiguity at this stage. Priorities can change all the time. You are on your own as well. Like you can have very direct conversations. So how would you advise people, leaders, to better work with founders?
So I think one thing we need to really, really remember, forgive me for saying this, I think we forget that founder might not have the experience that we have. And don't get me wrong, they have crazy skills and, tenacity that we don't have. They can see problems that nobody else can see and solve it in different ways that we can't see. They have the tenacity and grit to build organization from scratch. But we forget that they might not have run and operate a business before. And that's a whole different skill set. And it's not just for HR leaders. I've seen experienced execs who go, well, my founder, should have done that. They should have given us that, and they should know this. They don't. That's why they hired us. So when I work with founder, the most important thing is to meet them where they are. And that is really, really important. We can't meet them assuming they have run a business of 1,000 people and know how to operate all the complexity if they have never done that. But if they have, then meet them where they are. And therefore, for me, I will play various different roles. I will play, a coach. I may play an educator if it's something new. I will play a thinking partner with them if it's something they want to, brainstorm. So meet them where they are, play different role depending on the situation where it's needed, and be part of the founder's career growth journey as well. So that's what I would do.
As a founder, is there anything I can do, anything I should pay attention to better support, my leadership team?
I know you say support. Yeah, probably so.
Let's say, or work better with them, or anything that I might be missing. Because again, there's certain things where I don't have the same level of depth in terms of knowledge and experience that you just described.
Okay. What I tend to see with founder is really interesting, because you go, I'm going to hire people more experienced than me, and I will, I will defer to them. Ultimately, your role is still to set direction and make certain choices. And founders sometimes forget that your role is to leverage, all their knowledge and experience. But at the end of the day, because of your job, it is still you who will make a final call on certain decision, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, and be okay doing that. Many founders go, but I don't want to tell my people what to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're not telling them what to do. You're telling them what direction you're heading towards. Then you let them figure out how to get there. But you need to point to the direction you want to go to. Does that make sense?
Beautiful. Yes. Appreciate you sharing that. Any final piece of advice you have for the audience, for people listening? Yes.
I'm going to guess most of the audience will be HR leaders.
Very likely.
Yeah. So one thing that I've always done and has never really put it to words is, if you are going through these stages, be really aware that if you're in the start stage, you have about 18 to 24 months. If you're in the build stage, you have about 2 to 3 years. And then the scale stage, about 5 to 6 years. Because I am in the build stage, one thing that I realize is you have 2 to 3 years to build the whole organization and employee life cycle end to end. 2 to 3 years.
Why only that short amount of time?
So if you look at two things, right? From the business perspective, that is the time you are growing your revenue. You need to build, your go-to market engine. But from the employee perspective as well, if you look at, what is the average tenure of a role, is about 22 months. So the journey of your employee from, starting, being set up for success, being grown in the current role, performing in the current role, being rewarded in the current role, they want to move to the next step. And hopefully not outside, hopefully within your organization, which means the employee journey needs to be paved out in that 22 months to 3 years.
That's very helpful advice.
Yeah, because it's easy for us to go, let's build, in my head, there's actually a vision of a path employee journey. And it's better to have the full path MVP, or basic bricks, if you like, than mud patch, golden bridge, mud patch, golden bridge.
Any resources for people that you love that can be useful?
Currently, there's a lot. But I'll say what's currently I am enjoying reading is actually the library from Notion Capital. I promise this is not an effort for them. So currently what I'm really loving is broadening my perspective. They have really good people and content, but what I love is they are also tying that to how that impact, go to market, building product, etc. And being a HR leader, many of us wants to be more commercial, understand the business better. So it's a rich resource.
Amazing. Where people can connect with you?
Surprise, LinkedIn.
I've seen you pretty active there, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I don't know how to use TikTok, that's why.
Fantastic. Joobee, massively appreciate you taking the time. This was a special one. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cool. We did pretty good.
I feel really calm.
I told you, like, there is this element of, again, if you get, like, there's still an